Unfortunately, that was not to be. After a minute or so, it was clear I was dealing with explosive diarrhea. It's amazing how grease can make its way through your intestines far faster than the food which spawned the grease to begin with. But I digress. I got up from the table and made my way to the bathroom. Upon entering, I saw two sinks immediately inside the door, two urinals just to the right of the sinks, and two toilet stalls against the back wall. One of them was a handicapped bathroom. Now, normally I would have gone to the handicapped stall, since I like to stretch out a bit when I take a good shit, but in this case, the door lock was broken. And the only thing I hate worse than my wife telling me to stop cutting my toenails with a pair of diagonal wire cutters is having someone walk in on me while I'm taking a shit. I went to the normal stall. In retrospect, I probably should have gone to the lodge handicap stall, even though the door would not lock, because that bit of time lost in making the stall switch proved to be a bit too long under the circumstances. By the time I had walked into the regular stall, the pressure on my ass was reaching biblical proportions. I began the move. For those women who may be listening to this, let me take a moment to explain the move. Men know exactly what their bowels are up to at any given second. And when the time comes to empty the cache, a sequence of psychological or physiological events occur that cannot be stopped under any circumstances. There's a move men make that involves simultaneously approaching the toilet, beginning the body turn to position one's ass towards said toilet, hooking one's fingers into one's ass, and falling down the pants while beginning the squat at the same time. It is a very fluid motion that, when performed properly, results in the flawless expulsion of shit at the exact same second that one's ass is properly placed on the toilet seat. Done properly, it even assures that the chode is properly inserted into the front rim of the toilet in the event that the piss stream lets loose at the same time. It is truly a picture of coordination rather than that of a skilled ballet dancer. I was about halfway into the move when I looked down at the floor and saw a pile of vomit that had been previously expelled by one of those little bastards attending kids' night. It was mounted up in the corner, so I didn't notice when I first walked into the stall. Normally, I would not have been bothered by such a thing, but I had eaten so much and the pressure upward was so intense that I had a rarely experienced gag reflex. And once that reflex started, combined with the intense pressure upward caused by the bloated stomach, 4 plates of macaroni and beef started coming up for a rematch. What happened next was so quick that the exact sequence of events are a bit fuzzy, but I'll try and reconstruct them as best I can. In that moment of impending projectile vomiting, my attention was diverted from the goings-on at the other end. To put a freeze frame on the situation, I was half crouched down the toilet, pants pulled down to my knees, with a load of vomit coming up my esophagus. Now, most of you know that vomiting takes precedence over shit, no matter what is about to come slamming at your arse. It's apparently an evolutionary thing, since shitting will not kill you. But vomiting takes presence of mind to accomplish so that you do not aspirate any food into the bronchial tubes, and perhaps choke to death. My attention was thus diverted. At that very split second, my ass exploded into what can only be described as a wake. You know, as in a newspaper headline along the lines of 30,000 killed in wake of Typhoon Fifi, or something similar. In what seemed to be most suitably measured in cubic feet, an enormous plug of shit, the consistency of thick mud with embedded pockets of breezy liquid, came flying out of my arse. But remember, I was only halfway down the toilet at that moment. The shit wave was of such force that of such an angle in relation to the back curve of the toilet seat that it ricocheted off the back of the seat and slammed into the wall at an angle of incidence equal to the angle at which it initially hit the toilet seat. Then I sat down. Recall that when that event occurred, I was already halfway to sitting anyway, and had actually reached the point of no return. I've always considered myself as relatively stable gravitationally, but when you get beyond a certain point, you're going down no matter how limber you may be. Needless to say, the shitwave, though of considerable force, was not so sufficient as to completely eat my penis. Was not so sufficient as to completely glance off the toilet seat and deposit itself on the walls, like what when you see when you're hitting a puddle with a high pressure water hose. Even though you throw water at the puddle gets moved and no water is left to reform the puddle. There was a significant amount of shit remaining on about 1/3 of the seat rim, which I had just now collapsed upon. Now, back to the vomit. While all the shitting was going on, the vomit was still on its way up. By the time I'd actually collapsed on the toilet, my mouth had filled up with a goodly portion of the macaroni and beef I had just consumed. Okay, so what does the human body instinctively do when vomiting? One bends over. So I'd bent over. I was still sitting on the toilet, though. Therefore, bending over resulted in me placing my head above my now slightly opened legs, positioned in between my knees and waist. Although directly above my pants, which were now pulled down to a point just midway between my knees and my ankles. Now, did I mention I was wearing not just pants, but sweatpants with elastic on the ankles? In one mighty push, some 3 pounds of macaroni and beef, 2 or 3 cokes, and a couple of big fat yeast rolls were deposited in my pants on the inside, with no ready exit at the bottom down by my feet. In the next several seconds, there were a handful of farts, a couple of turds, and the event ended. Yet I was now sitting there with my pants full of vomit, my back covered in shit that had bounced off the toilet, spattered on 3 ceramic tiled walls to a height of about 5 feet, and still had enough force to come back at me, covering the back of my shirt with droplets of liquid shit. All our thick shit was spread all over my arse in a ring curiously in the shape of a toilet seat. And there was no fucking toilet paper. What could I do but laugh? I must have sounded like a complete maniac to the guy who then wandered into the bathroom. He actually asked if I was okay. Since I was laughing so hard, I must have sounded like I was crying hysterically. I calmed down just enough to ask him if he would get the manager. I told him to have the manager bring some toilet paper. When the manager walked in, he brought the toilet paper with him, but in no way was prepared for what happened next. I simply told him that there was no way I was going to explain what was happening in the stall, but that I needed several wet towels. I needed him to go ask my wife to come help me. I told him where we were sitting and left, and he left. At that point, I think he was probably assuming that I'd pissed just a bit in my pants, or something similarly benign. About 2 minutes later, my wife came into the bathroom not knowing what was wrong, and with a certain amount of worry in her voice. I explained to her, still laughing and having trouble getting out the words, that I had a slight accident and needed her help. Knowing that I experienced some close calls in the past, she probably assumed that I laid down a small turd or something. I just needed to bring the car around so we could boat immediately. Until I asked her. I'm sure she had no idea that she was about to go across the street and purchase me some new underwear, new socks, new pants, a new shirt, and, by that time due to considerable leakage around the elastic ankles thingies, new sneakers. And she then started to laugh herself since I was still laughing. She began to ask for an explanation as to what had happened, when I promised her I would tell her later, but that I just needed to handle damage control for the time being. She left. The manager then came back in with a half-dozen wet towels and a few dry ones. I asked him to also bring a mop and a bucket, upon which he assured me that they would clean up anything that needed to be cleaned. Without giving him specific details, I explained that what was going on at that stall was a night far in excess of what I would expect anyone to deal with. What with most of the folks working at Ryan's making minimum wage of just slightly above. At that moment, I think it dawned on him exactly the gravity of the situation. Then that manager went so far above the call of duty that I'll be eternally grateful for his actions. He hooked up a hose. Fortunately, commercial bathrooms are constructed with tile walls and tile floors and have a drain in the middle of the room in order to make cleanup easy. Fortunately, I was in a commercial bathroom. He then hooked up the hose to a spigot located under the sink as I began cleaning myself up with wet towels. Just as I was finishing, my wife got back with the new clothes and passed them into the stall, whereupon I stuffed the previously worn clothes into a plastic bag that came from the store, handing the bag to my wife. I finished cleaning myself off and carefully put on my new clothes, still stuck in the stall, since I figured that it would be in bad taste to go out of the stall to get redressed, in the event I happened to be standing there naked, and some little bastard kid walked in. At that point, I had only made a mess. I'd not yet committed a felony, and I intended to keep it that way. When I finished getting dressed, I picked up the hose and cleaned up the entire stall, washed down the remains toward the drain in the center of the room. I put down the hose and walked out to the bathroom. I had intended to go to the manager and thank him for all he had done. When I walked out, 3 of the management staff were there to greet me with a standing ovation. I started laughing so hard I thought they were going to throw me up again. I thought I was going to throw up again. But I managed to scurry out the door, out to the car. My wife was now waiting to pick me up by the front door. The upshot of all this is that I strongly recommend eating dinner at Ryan's Steakhouse. They have by far the nicest management staff of any restaurant in which I've eaten.